It is my pleasure to welcome all of you and to thank you very much for coming tonight. I am honored, proud, very excited to welcome all of you to the inaugural public event of Machon Siach at SAR High School, honoring the memory of Belda K. Lindenbaum. Machon Siach derives from twin commitments or beliefs. The Machon strives to reshape high school into more of a thinking institution by developing our own space here at SAR and working to expand the concept in cooperation with other schools. It also derives from a commitment to developing high school teachers as public intellectuals and thought leaders on matters that shape the modern Orthodox community. Currently, while rabbis and professors are granted voice in the community and the space for research, schools and teachers have remained in the role of practitioner and implementer without time or funds to support substantive teacher inquiry and research. Thus, major Jewish educational and cultural questions remain unaddressed. And yet the truth is that our teachers are situated at the nexus where generations, cultures, theory, and practice all meet. High school teachers are uniquely positioned to bridge these worlds, and their voices must be cultivated and heard. And I believe that our SAR teachers are remarkably able to do so. In that spirit, the Machon seeks to develop a local, school-based scholarship of teaching that provides public presentations on Jewish education subject to the critique of colleagues upon which others can build. Here's a brief sketch of how it works. Each year, two groups, each comprised of 6 to 8 educators, embark on a 2-year project focused on an area of educational significance to our community. During the first year, the group invests about 100 hours in shared reading, preparation, and dialogue, developing shared language and understandings in the chosen area. At the end of year 1, each participant selects an area of focus within the broader topic. In year 2, each participant will produce different products, all emanating from the chosen research area: a paper, a conference presentation, a TED-type talk, and online resources for independent study for the broader public. I believe that this project has the potential over the course of years to strengthen modern Orthodoxy and its educational institutions by raising the level of discourse of our teachers, supporting their engagement with the critical issues of the day, and bringing that discussion to our parents and our graduates, our emerging young adults on campus and beyond. I feel that this is increasingly important today as we see ourselves choosing to live in communities and daven in shuls within those communities that match up with our political and religious leanings. A school like SAR then becomes distinctive as an institution in which different voices or points of view come together as we try together to hash out a way to navigate our most challenging issues. I want to express my deep gratitude to SAR and to its remarkable leadership, particular to Gitti and to Jack for supporting my pursuit of this project. Jack, Gitti, you are the Gdolei Hador of institutional leadership. I am grateful for your wisdom and strength and for your always taking the long view. A new project of this sort always comes with uncertainty. Will people understand what we are after? Why we think it's important? Will it resonate beyond the 4 walls of my office? The Machon Siach captured the interest of the Lindenbaum family, of Marcel and his wonderful children. That is validating and gratifying and very exciting for us. The Lindenbaum family sets the standard for courageous and inspired Jewish communal leadership. Earning your confidence and support for this project has propelled us forward materially, emotionally, psychologically. And for me, for all of us, we feel a tremendous responsibility in that Machon Siach carries the name of Belda Lindenbaum. For all of us in the modern Orthodox community, Belda was the embodiment of courageous leadership, balancing commitment and loyalty to the modern Orthodox community with a spirit of change, of progress, of justice, Belda made that into an art form. That Machon Siach honors the memory of Belda Lindenbaum, that honor is most certainly ours. I know, and I actually feel it already, that this will serve as a personal gauge of our success. I will continually be asking myself, are we doing this well enough? Is our work good enough to serve as an honor to Belda's memory? And I take up that challenge with great pride. In that spirit, we would like to begin our program this evening with a tribute to Belda. But I cannot do so without first thanking three people without whom this evening and so much else would not be possible. To Alice Leibowitz, the program coordinator for Machon Siach, who has worked tirelessly in preparation for this event. To Heidi Greenbaum for her always remarkable work. To Elena Lefkowitz, who, as an expression of her deep love and admiration for Belda, produced on very short notice the video presentation that you are about to see. And thanks as well to Josh Lewis and the tech team, and to Nick Fada and his team as well. And thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I ask you to please turn your attention to the screen for a video tribute, to be followed by remarks from one of the dear grandchildren and SAR graduate, Zev Lindenbaum.
There's an expression in Hebrew that the chut hameshulash lo bimheira yinatek, that this cord or this chain is not broken easily. And I suppose two things operate here. Is my sense that I don't want to be the one to break the chain, and there's also the sense that I have a great pride in this chain and in this tradition that I am part of.
My mother was very much a product of the 50s and a traditional Jewish upbringing.
Having a daughter herself in 1967, a time when women were starting to find voice, galvanized my mother to get more active.
And that was, I think, the beginning of the journey. It was a personal one initially. How do I raise daughters? But that led to questions about women's role in shul, about women's role in the community.
Victoria and Amanda used to say, why can't we finish the service like the boys do? So Belda and I found this crazy women's minyan up on 100-something street, and rain or shine, freezing cold, once a month, we would take them up there. I remember they met in the basement. You could hear the toilet flushing, but we took them back and forth because we started to understand something new.
Just after I was born, my mother decided that she was going to find a woman to lecture and teach women to be more assertive and record it and sell it on a tape for people to listen to. She heard about this woman at CUNY. She took her out for tea at the plaza, and when this woman said no, she said, thumb wrestle me, and if I win, you'll consider it. This woman, she said, was this big woman, and she won the thumb wrestle, and she said, you see, I look small, but I'm not puny, and my idea isn't puny either.
When she became convinced that the particular rules were unfair in the society in which we live, and that the world had evolved, it was time for us, the Jewish community, to do so as well.
She wanted to fight the fight in her community and maintain the basic value structures of that community, but still getting women what they deserve.
She never considered, as far as I know, ever leaving Orthodoxy, even though people used to say to her, just be a conservative Jew, what's the big deal? But she knew that what was right, and that the halakha and that the system, that our society must conform to what was right. And that if it wasn't, it was not God's fault, it was human beings' fault.
We were in a shul in Israel, and they start walking out before we said Kaddish. She yells down from the balcony, Kaddish! And the rabbi said, Ostagidi, so say it. She said, well, answer it.
She had the ability to speak truth to power. She was not intimidated.
In this life, if you want to accomplish something, you have to break some eggs and ruffle feathers.
We would laugh about her finger, because she didn't care if she was talking to the chief rabbi of somebody or the president of the United States. This finger would come out. I remember I would kind of push it in like, put it back.
She was on the board of Jewish Education. She was the president of the American Friends of Bar Ilan University, B'nai Akiva. And then she read Blue Greenberg's book on women in Judaism. That energized her, and she started learning at Drisha. And then one day, Blue decided that there had to be a conference. My mother said, "Do you think anyone will come?" Over 1,000 people came to this conference. The excitement was palpable, and everyone kept saying, I thought I was the only person who felt this way. Then the conference planners came together and said, this means we need an organization. And JOFA was born, with Blue Greenberg as its president and my mother as a vice president. Before my mother passed away, she had told us very clearly that she wanted to give a significant gift to SIR High School. And actually Rabbi Harkstark brought up Machon Siach and the idea that he had been germinating for a long time. And we all kind of leapt at it. We thought it was such an innovative idea that we had never heard of before, tackling subject matters that most parents, frankly, in schools and institutions somewhat shy away from, and taking them on head on.
We're going to go over in just a moment
Machon Siach is an attempt to give teachers a public voice and to give them an opportunity to research large questions that are of importance for the Jewish community and the educational community in its broader sense. High school is really the nexus between generations and communities at a particularly potent moment in students' lives. You have kind of the community, the parents, teachers, the next generation. It all comes together in a particular culture, and there's a lot that needs to be thought about in terms of engaging that most purposefully. And Machon Siach is an attempt to give teachers the opportunity to do that.
So I'm part of the sexuality group, and what we've been thinking about is how we help cultivate an ethic around sexuality for our students. How do we talk to our students about cultivating a sexual ethic that they can be proud of, that they can feel committed to, that is motivated by values that we believe in?
What Machon Siach is attempting to do, something that I believe that Belda would identify with very strongly, and I consider it to be a great honor to have Belda's name associated with this program.
I think my grandmother would be extremely happy with the gift she left behind. I can say, my grandmother started this, my grandmother worked for this, and I now think it's my responsibility, not only as her granddaughter, but as a part of the modern Orthodox community, to continue her work and to keep pushing and to keep building future roads and pavements and pathways for generations that will come after me.
You make baby steps. It's exhausting. And my sister often says, why do you keep doing this? And I say, it's just that I won't leave the street. I'm not climbing into the gutter. If they want to do things, they have to walk around me. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to change it.
L'chvod my parents and my Saba, my extended family, Rabbi Harkstark, the entire faculty, esteemed board members, and honored guests. As mentioned on your program this evening, my name is Zev Lindenbaum. I am Belda Aleha Shalom and Marcel Lindenbaum's eldest grandchild and a proud member of the SAR High School class of 2012. Just last week, I graduated NYU's College of Arts and Science, and I begin work at Bank of America in July. None of what I just said in the last sentence would have been possible if not for God, my parents and grandparents, many of the educators in this room, and a healthy dose of my Savta, Belda Kaufman Lindenbaum. I have to start with my parents, because if not for them, I think I may have been a proud member of the Frisch class of 2012. I remember to this day, towards the end of 8th grade, walking into my kitchen and being convinced to choose SAR. Best decision I ever made. Or should I say, that they made for me. Next, to the educators in this room who made SAR a home away from home for me for 4 years and shaped the person who stands before you today. These walls, or lack thereof in some places, afforded me a top quality education, an atmosphere where Judaism thrived, and friends I will have for the rest of my life. SAR, with its grade floors and annexes, its basketball team and rocketry club, and from Dr. Schwartz to Yoram, somehow, some way made school fun. SAR even made it cool to stay after school had ended. I found myself staying late not just because I knew I could avoid my mom's Shabbat leftovers and have Carlson Gabby's instead, but also because I could study with a fellow or watch a game. However, my personal favorite part of SAR was the opportunity for growth. From my first day here until my last, both the students and faculty were empowered to create. The attitude was, if you couldn't find a club or team, make one, which I literally did. The school itself was and is a constantly evolving entity, and Machon Siach is a testament to that continued growth. A special shout out to my teachers, many of whom are in this room, who helped shape my college experience and professional career. To Ms. Daly, Mr. Lanik, and Dr. Schwartz for encouraging my love of history, to Ms. Schneider, whose economics classes inspired me to major in economics, and to Rabbi Hartstark, whose honors Gemara Shia I think I lasted about 2 or 3 weeks in. Lastly, a healthy dose of my Savta. When I was 10 years old, I actually thought my Savta was Wonder Woman, like the superhero. There was an old Wonder Woman comic in her apartment, and she convinced me that it was based on her earlier life before I was born. And I honestly believed it for years. It made perfect sense. My Savta made it seem like she had 30 hours in a day while the rest of us were stuck with 24. Savta sat on boards of prestigious schools and universities, fought for women's roles in Judaism, and supported Jewish education at all levels, while still finding time to spoil her grandchildren. Savta also embodied similar traits to that of SAR, living by a, if it does not exist yet, build it mantra. Jofa, Mujesh Linnebaum, and Yeshiva Ma'arat were all spawned because Savta felt there was an absence in the world of Jewish education and Torah learning for women. When I first read the description of Machon Siach, I noticed a few aspects that screamed my Savta. The format of the program, the active and future topics chosen, and the inclusivity all reflect the woman my Savta was in some way. However, the portion I think Savta would have enjoyed the most was the concept that everyone has a part in Machon Siach. Students, graduates, faculty, and parents alike are all essential to the survival of the program. It is a vital realization for individuals at any of those 4 levels, but specifically for the younger generation to have. The learning process never stops. Even the wisest and most senior among us still have the opportunity to learn. My Savta was someone who took this to heart. Though known for her activism in the Jewish Orthodox feminist sphere, Savta took learning seriously at all stages of her life. Her Shabbat dinner table discussions were transformed into halachic debates, with Savta, her children and grandchildren, quickly running to bring out a source as proof. Our birthday shopping trip was once interrupted by a long examination into the prohibition against wearing shatnez. My mother's first time ever meeting my Savta was at a Chumash class at Drisha. Savta would be proud to have Machon Siach bear her name, and would be proud to have it take place in a school that meant so much to her. A Ramaz graduate herself, her relationship with SAR developed later in life. Now, with 3 graduated grandchildren, 4 more currently in the high school, and hopefully more to come, SAR has become a Lindenbaum family staple. I started the trend, and my cousins have continued it, but my Savta also became an SAR student in her own right. She attended hockey games, adult education, and formed meaningful relationships with the faculty, many of whom attended institutions that she too was a part of. It makes perfect sense that SAR is dedicated to the memory of J.J. Greenberg, as Blue Greenberg was my Savta's inspiration to become an activist for the role of women in Judaism in the first place. SAR is a place that inspired her to continue to think differently and deeply about the issues in her life, and to encourage others to do so as well. Machon Siach speaks to the heart of that which he valued, and as a direct recipient of the SAR experience, I am so happy to see it happen in this building. So thank you to SAR for giving me that experience, and thank you to my Savta for making sure that that experience only continues to improve for others. Yehei Zechra Baruch. Thank you.
I teach 11th grade honors Gemara, so I never had Zev. He was already gone by then, but I did have the privilege of teaching both Tamar and Noam Lindenbaum, and I look forward next year to having additional grandchildren in my Gemara class. Tonight, we are very excited to share with all of you some of the research, insights, and thought leadership developed by several members of one of our Machon Siach groups, the Israel Education Group. Before I introduce the program, I want to take just a moment to thank Rabbi Hartstark for creating and envisioning this Machon. And this has been a long-term vision that is finally now really moving forward in a beautiful way. It took many years and many revisions, but his commitment to the vision for Machon Siach is something that has inspired me and many of the other faculty fellows who are participating, and we want to acknowledge their participation and contributions tonight. I also personally want to thank Dr. Rivka Schwartz, who together with Rabbi Hartstark, the three of us have spent many hours over the past 12 months working through the vision and all the details and pushing it through in a way that we can be so proud of what we're presenting tonight. Really, Machon Siach for teachers at SAR High School, as my colleague Simon Fleischer wrote, is a statement of trust, entrusting us to contribute to global educational and religious conversations, and for that, we are extremely grateful to Rabbi Hartstark, to SAR, and to the Lindenbaum family. Tonight's colloquy serves a dual purpose. The discussion we're about to have will both model and further advance the work of Machon Siach. Let me give some background. In the realm of Israel education, our work emerges from dual, but not dueling, commitments. The first commitment is to a proud religious Zionism, and to the view that the establishment of the State of Israel and the events of the Six-Day War, which we will celebrate this week, are historic moments of religious significance for the Jewish people. The second commitment is to educating our students in a way that will both enhance their identification with Medinat Yisrael and provide a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the history and reality of modern Israel and of the Israel-diaspora relationship. This more robust and sophisticated approach to Israel education and religious Zionism will enrich our students' education and better prepare them for the intellectual opportunities and challenges they will confront in their post-high school years. The Israel Education Group's work began with the formation of a faculty Beit Midrash, which met regularly for more than a year to develop shared language through research and discussion. The group then began researching and writing papers on several subtopics. In addition to the papers Rabbi Hartstark and Dr. Schwartz will be presenting tonight, this research includes papers and curricular enhancements in other areas, rethinking how we do our yoms and commemorations, an important study that Dr. Tammy Jacobowitz has been working on. Research and development of curriculum by Ms. Laura Frank and Ms. Adina Schulzen in the realm of Israel history education. Ms. Shuvi Hoffman has been focusing on broadening our understanding of modern Israel, giving our students an understanding of the richness of the realities, opportunities, and challenges of the contemporary state of Israel that go beyond the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And finally, the group has worked with the administration and department chairs to implement ways of enhancing Israel education across our curriculum, from a unit in 10th grade Gemara that was just begun about Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, to studying in English class poetry of Israel and Jerusalem. We are now incorporating Israel education in a variety of courses and contexts. The two presentations you are about to hear, just a moment, from Dr. Schwartz and Rabbi Hartstark have been adapted and refined from earlier drafts of papers shared and critiqued by the Israel Education Fellows and participants. These updated presentations will be followed by a brief response and critique by Dr. Tammy Jacobowitz, highlighting additional avenues for inquiry and research and perhaps challenging some of the paper's assumptions and conclusions. Dr. Jacobowitz's response will then serve as the basis for further discussion tonight, and we hope in the weeks ahead, ultimately enhancing the final papers and related products. Tonight is the first time these papers will be shared outside of Rabbi Hartstark's office, with a larger audience of Machon Siach fellows, participants, SAR faculty and administration, and community members. We look forward to hearing your comments and feedback on these presentations during the final portion of the program this evening. We also invite your feedback after reading the papers we have distributed that form the basis for tonight's presentations. It's my honor to call upon Dr. Rivka Schwartz for the first presentation.
Good evening. I want to begin with a few thank yous. I know we've heard a lot of thank yous this evening, but those of us who work on Machon Siach are deeply grateful to the many people whose vision has made what we do possible, because even in its relatively short tenure has proven to be something that is deeply shaping how we experience life in SAR High School, and we hope will come to deeply shape a broader conversation in the Orthodox community. To the Lindenbaum family, thank you so much for the vision and the commitment that has helped us realize what was a long-standing dream of Rabbi Hartstark's to turn, as he said, the high school into a thinking institution. To Rabbi Hartstark, I will not embarrass you, as I usually do when I speak about you in public, except to say that I tell the kids all the time that they don't appreciate what they have in having you as their principal, but we, the faculty, do. The hours that we have spent in conversation together in Rabbi Hartstark's office, Rabbi Hartstark, Rabbi Hain, and myself, the other teachers involved, the Machon Siach fellows involved in the conversation, have been some of the most rewarding, enriching, broadening, challenging hours of this year. My particular paper started from the following motivating question. When we talk in the broader community about Israel education in our high schools, the question that gets raised often, regularly, is how are we preparing our kids to confront the threat of BDS on college campuses? That is how the question gets framed. And not just by parents of 12th graders either. We go to parlor meetings with parents of 8th graders, prospective high school students, and one of the things that they want to know as they choose a high school for their children is how we are preparing students to engage in this particular way with this particular challenge. And yet when our students come back to us, our alumni come back to us from college campuses and talk to us about the ways in which they feel prepared and unprepared to engage around Israel, we just don't hear them saying to us, why didn't you arm me with more facts so I could combat BDS? Instead, what our students often say to us is, I feel like there was a piece of the picture that I was missing. There was something more complicated and more nuanced that I'm not sure that I heard when I was in high school, and it would have been very helpful for me to hear that to prepare me to engage for the realities of the Israel conversation on campus. So this could be a curricular question. What should we teach students to best equip them to engage with what they are going to find when they go to college campuses? But a Machon Siach question goes beyond just what are we going to teach our seniors before they leave to go to college campuses. A Machon Siach question asks, where is this disconnect or divide that so much of the energy and investment of the adults in the community when it comes to preparing our students to engage around Israel doesn't seem to be oriented towards what the students themselves are telling us that they need. Over the course of this year, as I worked on this topic, Machon Siach, I went to 3 different conferences that addressed some aspect of American Jews and Israel. And it was at the second one, a conference organized by the Shalom Hartman Institute about Jews and Muslims in America in January, that I heard something that really came to me as a revelation. Tamara Kaufman-Wittes, a scholar at the Brookings Institution, talked about the fact that it's actually well established that in diasporic communities, what you see is that as a way of establishing their continual loyalty to the home country, that they have not forgotten it, that they have not given up that connection, the diasporic communities can remain more fixed and less developing than, in fact, the home countries are. That in the home countries, political circumstances, understandings can change and evolve, and yet in the diasporic communities, in order to prove that they haven't given up that connection, they remain fixed where they were. And the 2 examples that she gave were Cuban Americans in Miami and Irish Americans in Boston. It was a very well-established fact in American political study that Cuban Americans in Miami retained a very, very hard-line position on U.S.-Cuba relations, even as the decades passed and many Cubans in Cuba wanted a relaxed and warmer relationship. Similarly, Irish Americans in Boston were actually major funders for decades of IRA terrorism. They were proving the intensity of their support for the Irish Republican cause by funding IRA terrorists back home, which the people back home at some point might have preferred that they not do. That was striking to me for two reasons. The first reason is that learning a truth that speaks to other communities and then can inform how we understand ours as well, to me is very much about the grand conversation between the Jewish community and the world. And it was also striking to me because it seemed to exactly be addressing the question that I was wondering about. We have some measure of conflicted feeling about ourselves being here, being in the diaspora, not being in Israel. One way we can prove the intensity of our commitment is to hold on to very clear, very black and white positions, even as in Israel itself, a much wider range of possible political positions and possible ideas get entertained. And what our kids, what our alumni, what our young adults are saying to us is, maybe that's not what we need to do. Maybe we don't need to establish our identity in that way. Maybe there's another way to establish our identity as committed Zionist Jews. And once I realized that that was the question that I should be asking, my thinking went to a very famous, even canonical work of history, Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities. This is a book about nationalism, and he talks about that nation, that our nationalism is our intensity of feeling for. And he describes the nation as an imagined community. It is imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them. Yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. Finally, it is imagined as a community because regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as deep, horizontal comradeship. Ultimately, it is this fraternity that makes it possible over the past 2 centuries for so many millions of people not so much to kill as willingly to die for such limited imaginings. The nation, then, says Benedict Anderson, is a community that we imagine, we create in our heads, and we see ourselves as part of. And then we can talk about what community are we imagining for ourselves? What community are we asking our students to imagine them for themselves? And then perhaps we can say that we do not have to imagine for ourselves the diasporic community proving the intensity of its commitments by being unable to entertain certain kinds of nuance and complexity, but that in fact we can imagine for ourselves a different kind of community. Not the imagined community of being Israeli either. We are not Israeli. As strong as our connections are, as deep as our feelings run, it would be inappropriate for us to say, well, we're Israeli too, and we therefore have precisely the same positions, precisely the same right to weigh in as Israelis do. But a different imagined community, an imagined community that says, yes, we are diasporic Zionists, but we are diasporic Zionists who see ourselves as deeply committed to and invested in the Zionist project, that we can therefore see it to some extent, not with the eye of the outsider who has to prove their commitment with their hardlineness, but with the eye of the insider whose commitment is assured enough that we can engage with complexity and nuance, that we can as well educate our students about contemporary Israel in a way that goes beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that introduces them to the full range of issues and personalities and questions that form the exciting, challenging, complicated country that is Israel today. And in doing that, we can have students not only who are better prepared to engage with what they encounter on college campuses, but indeed are prepared to see themselves as a particular kind of Zionist community, as a Zionist community that is informed by what it knows from the diaspora, that is engaged with what is going on in Israel, that is deeply committed, and that is intellectually sophisticated. And this, we think, better than arming our students with facts, better than preparing our students to go into combat, will be the best preparation for our students, not only on college campuses, but for a lifelong engagement with a rich, meaningful, sophisticated Zionism. Thank you.
How you guys all doing there? So I chose to write about religious Zionism in the diaspora, and because I'm also using the word diaspora a lot, I feel like I want to offer a word of qualification, kind of a qualifier. Maybe it's an apologetic. Maybe it's expiating my sense of guilt about dealing kind of with all of these things. The questions, where this is coming from for us is that the institution here is a very strongly religious Zionist place that's going to celebrate Yom Yerushalayim in an amazing way and does a lot of, should I say, we honor our chayalim at dinners, and we love it, and we are proud, and we push the idea of people, of our graduates moving and settling in the land of Israel. And actually, it's fair to say that we have that as an ideal. I think that part of what I'd like to explore is kind of that line between an ideal that becomes an ideology and the way in which that gets complicated for us and things that we have to think about here. So if I would ask the question, what does it mean to be a religious Zionist living in the American diaspora? I guess I would say, to echo what Rivka said, that's not a Machon Siach question in the sense that lots of people have talked about that and thought about that, but there's a very kind of concrete part of this that I experience all the time. This is why the question came to me. A lot of our students go to Camp Moshava in the summer. My kids have been Camp Moshava. I love that place. They communicate a very clear message, which is make aliyah, and that's it. There's not much else to it, and I say this with respect and pride, but also as a point of difference between the way that message is communicated and what happens here, where we are religious Zionists, we love the Medina, we give all of those positive messages, but we don't quite give it in such a singular kind of way. And for a long time, I think that I've wondered whether that's just a product of a lack. Like, are we just less committed to that idea? Or is there something else that's hard to articulate or that hasn't been articulated that is actually worth exploring? So what I'm putting forward is that the fact that we've given a particular kind of message but left something, kind of a remainder, if you will, is, I think, a sign that there's something that needs to be poked at a little bit and explored a little bit more, because sometimes people's behaviors, the way that they think, things that they do, reflect some deep ideas that just haven't been articulated and theorized, and that's part of what the project was. And the second form that it takes is in imagining, it plays out often when we have a speaker who will come from Israel and will speak to our students, and they're passionate and inspired, and I know that there's a sense on the part of the students and the faculty that this is a great talk, but if you dig a little bit, there's a certain condescension, exclusion. It's, well, you're here and you don't really understand, you're missing the boat a little bit, or just a straight up push that all of you here should actually be in Israel. And what that means for us as educators, and this is the way in which we're asking the question as educators in a school and not in terms of theology and politics and all of that, is what actually are the messages that our kids understand, what parts of that are being talked about openly, what parts of that are just being left for ourselves and our kids to kind of sort out on our own without actually talking about it clearly and explicitly. And all that kind of pushed me to take a look at the question, again, the question of diasporic religious Zionism. So I want to start this part of the analysis by I'd like to share with you two quotes regarding how to think about the diaspora, and both of them are pretty recent. The first it's quoted pretty often. On the evening of May 1st, 2006, the American Jewish Committee opened its centennial celebration in Washington, D.C. And the first panel there was held in the Library of Congress, and it was pretty distinguished. Ted Koppel was the moderator. Cynthia Ozick, Rabbi Steinsaltz, Leon Wieseltier, and A.B. Yoshua were the panelists. The title of the conference of that session is called "What Will Become of the Jewish People?" And as you might have guessed, A.B. Yoshua's comments caused quite the firestorm, so much so that the American Jewish Committee has published a small book of all the responses back and forth from that comment. From that, it was longer. I'm going to quote to you a shorter quote. Here's an excerpt of what he said. He said, "I will not have and cannot keep my identity outside Israel. Being Israeli is my skin. It's not my jacket. You are changing jackets. From Argentina, you take your jacket to Brazil, from Brazil to America. You are changing countries like the Jews have done all the time, changing countries like changing jackets. I have my skin, the territory, the smell of the territory, the smell of the language. All this is my identity. Whatever religion is inside this or is not inside, to play all the time with the pathological interaction with the anti-Semite, what he thinks about you, what he speaks about you, this is not my game. I have to say to you, I very much welcome your dual loyalty, but I don't get it. I would like that you would have one loyalty in Israel and participate. The fact that Israel is on your mind does not help me. You're living with all your loyal feelings to Israel, but you're a living myth about Israel and not the history of Israel. When people quote this line from A.B. Yoshua, they will immediately say, this is classic negation of exile, shlilat hagolah kind of ideology. And I just want to put that out there and contrast that with a way of reading the diaspora, quoting Ruth Weiss in her book, Jews in Power. She writes, the Jewish diaspora is one of history's boldest political experiments, an experiment as novel as the idea of monotheism itself, and inconceivable without it. Jews did not consciously plan to continue their national life outside the land of Israel. Neither, until modern times, did any of them develop an ideology committed to stateless existence. Yet to live abroad meant to thrive as a nation without three staples of nationhood: land, central government, and a means of self-defense. It is, I think, pretty inspiring, and I think a very powerful image. And there's something about being a child of a survivor who lived in Poland, I don't know, that I find something very powerful about seeing the diaspora as one of history's boldest experiments and as novel as monotheism itself. And I felt like it gave me the power to kind of think to myself, and then it took a little bit of courage, I found. I don't know if this will resonate or you'll chuckle at it, to sit in a room with my colleagues and say, I do think that writing out the past 2,000 years, there's a lot that is there. There's something that diaspora brought, the hybridity of diaspora, that was actually really remarkable. If you think about the richness of Jewish practice and culture, that is a product of the diaspora. The Babylonian Talmud, the Tosfot, Maimonidean philosophy, Iberian Kabbalah, Hasidut are some of the sacred treasures of the Jewish diaspora. Now somebody will say, okay, what's the American contribution? And there's a question as to whether we're doing what we should or not. And actually that is, in a certain sense, we are doing some things, but maybe that's precisely the point in terms of how we think about our role here. We've done a lot of things in the diaspora, and I just put this out there for your consideration. And maybe before moving on to the next piece, I would want to just say as follows. The reason why I see this as an educational question is because the part that bugs me the most, that I have the hardest time, is I've seen about myself is that when there are exclusions that happen, that really bothers me. So when the Jewish people say, this is the Jews and this is not, and I'm guilty, meaning this is a loaded issue, I'm not right, but there's when you say, there are 6 million Jews who are living in Israel, and there are 6 million Jews who are living in the diaspora, but that's not real, and this is real. And part of that argument includes cutting out a large part of Jewish history. I struggle with that a lot. I must admit, I have to acknowledge, I'm not talking theology here, and there's a lot more to, we're doing this in 12 minutes, so you would have to kind of be a little charitable in listening to what I'm saying because of all that's missing, but I hope you can kind of get the... So I asked myself, is there a way to think about this? Like, what's the way to think about us in America? And I was asking myself, because this is where I'm working here, and what's the role of... can we be like real Zionists in America, even though we're not living in Israel? What might that mean? And it caused me, I found myself attracted to, I think the way that I'm going to share it with you is by making one point that stems from the world of kind of political philosophy, and then a story. The political philosophy part is as follows. We often think about nations and states and talk about the nation state, and we think about them in exactly the same way. What it means to be a nation is to be part of a state which represents that nation. Actually, the more common way of thinking about it is that way. a nation is a group of people that adhere, that are part of a collective, and the way in which they express themselves is by establishing governance, establishing a country, and that's who they are. But there is a whole way of thinking about this in political theory that says, actually, these are two different things. There's an idea of the state, which is a certain kind of sovereignty, and there's an idea of a nation, which are people who bond together around shared values, and it actually might be connected to territory, but it might not be connected to territory also. And when I read that, what was striking to me is, well, who are we? So we know that you can ask that question. Judaism can be, Israel can be a state, it can be a nation, it can be a religion. I'm going to leave the religion part, I seem to be leaving the religion part out of this for the moment, and just think about who are we as a Jewish people. And when you think about it, we have a state, but we actually also have a nation. And those two ideas maybe are supplementary, complementary, they have something to offer. And I want to maybe illustrate this for a second by sharing with you an exchange by one of the people who wrote, he actually wrote 900 pages in Hebrew on this in the 1950s. His name was Shimon Ravidovich. Hard to read his writing. But he was the first chair of Jewish studies in Brandeis. He was a Polish Hebraist, came to America, and he wrote a book called Bavel v'Yerushalayim. Sometime in the late...
He also studied under Rav Moshe Bigdormiel. That's my father's.
When he was in Europe. When he was in Europe. Did you tell? Yeah, right. Yes, okay. I'll check my email. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, check the email. So, thank you. This is the Lindenbaum family in action, right? So, around the time of the formation of the State of Israel, there was a lot of discussion as to what to call this thing. And Ben-Gurion was very committed to Yisrael. And there were other options. Apparently, Yehuda was an option. There were a couple of different options. Shimon Ravidovich in America took great offense, and he wrote to Ben-Gurion, said, you cannot call the country Yisrael. You want to call it Eretz Yisrael, that's fine, but you can't call it Yisrael. And he wrote as follows. He said, regarding a connection, is there any means more suitable to maintain a connection between groups of a dispersed people, a state and a diaspora, than a shared name? Ben-Gurion concludes his first letter as follows. He's referring to he had an exchange. He says, we are all Jews, but only the citizens of the Jewish state are Israel. Ben-Gurion writes, I do not accept this decision, Ravidovich writes, which excludes 10 million souls of the diasporas, and myself among them, from the totality of Israel. For the time being, it is incumbent upon us to preserve the common heart and tongue of Babylon and Jerusalem. The question of Babylon is also the question of Jerusalem. Ravidovich's long book was called Bavel v'Yerushalayim, and what he argued is that Jews have lived for lots of its history as a territorial nation and a diasporic nation actually at the same time in ways that were mutually reinforcing and that offered something that was very powerful and very special by having both of those intact. There is one way of reading Jewish history that says we're supposed to be in Israel and the diaspora was a flaw and then we're supposed to return. He suggests a different way of reading history, which is the Jews are supposed to be in Israel, and Jews are also supposed to be in the diaspora, and both of those, through both of those, Jewish life has been enriched, and Jews have contributed to society in particular kinds of ways. And here I'll move to the kind of the last part and a half. I think that what Ravidovich is suggesting, and thinking about diaspora and Israel as being complementary, there's a certain kind of binocular vision that after I read that, I found myself seeing it over and over again. I want to share with you two things. The first, I'll just say, is a brief statement. I think that the hybridity of living in America offers Jews it's probably fair to say, I hope that this will resonate, that something about living in a nation in your own nation, is a little bit more particularistic, a little bit more ethnic, a little bit more, even if you have all the things going on. And there's something that's living outside of it that is a little bit more universal, a little bit more open to different kinds of ideas. And this is not a rule, it's just kind of a general vibe. And if you don't, if you disagree, I guess we can, but that's kind of a vibe, I guess, that I would say. And that's how you see the infiltration of ideas in medieval time, like all that, that's what's happening, kind of incorporating culture into. I've been very struck after seeing this that I think that some of the things that I love about Israel the most derive from Americans who moved to Israel and contributed certain things there. And I will just say, like Yeshivat Har Etzion and the Shalom Hartman Institute as two examples. And the reason why I'm raising that is because sometimes I find myself worried. I imagine what would happen, and in terms of the Yeshuat, at the end, I'm sure God will take care of, but in terms of our life right now, I sometimes look and I feel like if everyone just lived in the same place, I wonder actually, I wonder about it. What does the cultural hybridity offer in terms of the dialogue and the back and forth, in terms of strengthening Jewish life in lots of different ways? And rather than having to choose one or the other, have them going back and forth. And one other thing that I'd like to point to, which I find really remarkable, is Noam Pianko is a professor in Washington. He wrote a book on the roads not taken, Zionism, the roads not taken. And I want to share with you one point about American Zionism, pre-state American Zionism. But think for a second about what we remember about the United States. I don't know, whatever I've learned about it. There was certainly a moment where the idea in America was a melting pot concept. The idea is that everyone should kind of blend, differences should be kind of put to the side, and people should blend together. And there's a person who's credited with shifting, kind of creating the term that then became the source of moving in a different direction. His name was Horace Callan, and he is responsible for the term cultural pluralism. And he said, I don't think that the idea of having a free nation is to have everyone give up their difference so that everybody's doing the same. That's a kind of an oppression that can derive from Enlightenment thinking. You think this is about freedom, but you're forcing everybody to be free in exactly the same way. And he said, I think that what it means to be free is to allow collective minorities to express themselves in different kinds of ways. Horace Callan. Horace Callan was a Zionist who had a connection to this chevra of Mordechai Kaplan and people who thought about Zionism in the following way. He said, I can be a Zionist in America because in a very the idea of a collective minority having rights of expression in the United States was all about, for him, what has Jewish history been for Jews, if not the inability to be able to do that wherever they were living? And what would make America a great country if not to allow collective minorities to be able to express themselves in that kind of way? Which was him saying, I actually support the idea freedom in America means that as a minority and as a Jew, I can argue for the rights of all of us to be able to express ourselves and our cultures the way that it should. And his Zionism was, and we're going to try to express that in a state of our own, because nationalism has been sometimes so oppressive, so complicated, so forceful, that these kind of binocular forces of running your country in your country and being a minority in another country are kind of keep you honest in both cases. And the idea of imagining how the Jewish community, how Jews in Israel and Jews in the diaspora can be mutually reinforcing kind of forces in this kind of way is, I think, very powerful. And I will close as follows. I think that accepting the reality, we celebrate our students who live in Israel and make Aliyah, and the reality is that 90% of them, or more, maybe a little less, are going to be here. And it just feels like it's something that we need to think about in order to be able to talk about how they, our next generation, can take that responsibility in the most forceful kind of way. And I think that that has impact. If I can imagine a nation of Israelis and Americans who actually saw themselves as part of, right, I know this is, but saw themselves as part of a nation, it is so easy to imagine on a teacher level, on a student level, interaction in a whole different way. And I'll just quickly point to a couple of things. I mean, I've been trying to push through this, through this presentation, to saying that we should see ourselves as one nation, one that has a state model and one that has a diasporic representation that can be mutually reinforcing to each other culturally and politically. It's easy to imagine Israeli teachers teaching what it's like to be an American, having Israeli teachers and American teachers talking to each other because they actually have a kind of a shared enterprise in a different kind of way. And sometimes I even imagine that our students here have the possibility of serving as a bridge, a much needed kind of bridge. Americans largely are liberal in a way that they are getting increasingly disconnected and from the state. I feel like this modern Orthodox community is more nationalistic than liberal American Jewry, but more individualistic sometimes than kind of the collective in Israel. And sometimes I imagine, or I wonder, is there a role that we can play to help kind of maintain the connection between Israel and the diaspora, to keep our entire nation connected both as a nation and to the state? Thank you.
Okay, here's how the next 20 minutes or so are going to go. Dr. Jacobowitz is going to present a response to the two presentations of Rabbi Hartzark and Dr. Schwartz, and to their papers, which you all have. And then we're going to try to have a conversation, and no holds barred. Dr. Jacobowitz.
All right, I just want to add one more voice of gratitude to the chorus this evening. One of the beautiful parts of being in Machon Siach, usually in Rabbi Hartzark's office, is that it's a very interesting counterpoint to the fast pace of the high school day. We go in there, we're there for a period or two, and the ideas that germinate in that room germinate very slowly and very steadily, and they take the course of 1 or 2 or 3 years, and it works in counterpoint to the immediate needs of teaching students in 40 minutes or in 1 minute, or the programs that we need to present the next week. And so being a part of Machon Siach has been a really wonderful experience for me as a teacher and educator to feel both the slowness and the speed of educating our students. I have a fun job tonight. And I also had the advantage of reading the papers before tonight, which you all have in your packet. I may refer to 1 or 2 pages just for you to know what I'm talking about. Some of the comments that I wanted to make are based more in what I read than in what you heard, and I'll try to create a bridge for you between the presentations and the papers. The 2 papers that we heard, or the 2 presentations that you heard, have a lot in common and as well areas of difference. I wanted to highlight 4 areas in common between the 4 presentations that I think really reflect the work that the Israel Education Committee is doing in general. And then I wanted to point out 3 areas for additional inquiry or questioning. The first is, what I hear in both papers is that we want our students to feel like insiders of the Jewish narrative, to the story of the Jewish people. What is true when it comes to learning how to be fluent readers of Tanakh or Gemara, or engaged members of the Jewish philosophical tradition, is even more true when it comes to how our students conceive of themselves within the arc of Jewish history and of the Jewish present. We're eager in this school to find more ways for our students to engage more fully and with greater depth and richness with the Jewish world. The second is that we are in search of new paradigms and new metaphors to better serve our students and to better set them up to have an impact on the larger Jewish community and the Jewish future. The third, and this is certainly true for all of our work, we are ready to be more mindful and proactive about shaping our students' encounters with Israel and with Zionism. We are resisting old paradigms. We're resisting the notion that we are helpless, passive consumers of ideologies, and that we have no choice but to play by the rules established by others. Finally, I hear the desire for our Israel conversation, for our identity, for our kids' relationships to fit better within the structures and opportunities of our unique school community and culture. In Dr. Schwartz's paper, which I encourage you to read in depth, she speaks specifically about the grand conversation, which we all know and love, and how the way in which we engage with the grand conversation, the nuance, the complexity, the way we teach kids to approach the world, ought to extend to the way that we teach kids about Israel. And in Rabbi Harkstark's paper, when he speaks about the contrast between an abstract ideology and the situated lived reality of being in a school, he asks us to pay close attention to the setting, the teacher, the student, the milieu, the subject matter. Okay, that's what's in common. A couple of questions or probes. The first is about the last point about the school community. To Dr. Schwartz's question, when you talk about the grand conversation, what I'm curious about is if you're really worried about the grand conversation or if you're worried about our identity, our kids' identity with Israel. Meaning, are we concerned that if we don't allow kids or encourage kids to use the grand conversation value and model when it comes to Israel, that the entire conversation might fall apart? And we're worried about preserving our mode in general of approaching the world? Or are we concerned more primarily with how they engage with Israel? With Rabbi Harkstark's paper, when you spoke about Jonathan Schwab's formula, again, of the teacher-student milieu and subject matter, I'm wondering how we can effectively deal with the wide diversity of teachers and students that we have in the school. If we take seriously the notion that when it comes to teaching Israel and experiencing Israel, we need to consider who the students and the teachers, etc., are, how can we accommodate, even within our own faculty, a range of views, attitudes, experiences, assumptions about Israel, not to mention our students and the other institutions with which they are aligned and the other experiences that they have. How can we effectively negotiate all of those differences in our school community? And secondly, what we've discovered in our group is that a lot of the Israel education, quote unquote, that we engage with in this school takes place outside the classroom. Takes place in programming, it takes place in other kinds of conversations that are not managed by a teacher, some of which I explore in my paper, like the Yom HaZikaron or Yom HaAtzmaut ceremonies. How can we take the Schwab sensibility and apply that to the range of places in which Israel education happens? Secondly, all of the work that you both suggest involves our students managing a new kind of self-image, refashioning ourselves as strong, diasporic, North American Zionists with a sense of self which is not compromised or feeling less than or inferior, but rather part of the Jewish peoplehood, the Jewish nation. What I'm wondering about is if we can really manage this on our own. You mentioned Israeli speakers who come in, and in the paper you speak about damage control. Are we willing to, or do we have mechanisms for figuring out how to prepare our students to safeguard this kind of new image when they interface with Israelis and Americans who don't share this kind of self-identity? How can we control for that? In Dr. Schwartz's paper, and you mentioned this briefly in your comments, you suggest that we move away from a kind of military metaphor. The foot soldiering, the arming. We don't want our educational endeavor to be motivated by imagining our students as soldiers going off. Two questions about that. Number one, I wholeheartedly agree, but I'm wondering, can we fully abandon the military metaphor if we are aware that our students on campuses are perhaps the targets of or find themselves in the, borrowing the metaphor, the line of fire from students who are antagonistic? Can we close our eyes and say, although that's not our primary motivator in fostering an identity with Israel or their education, can we ignore what's going on? And on metaphors, and Rabbi Hartstark mentioned this at the end of his remarks, buried at the very end of the paper is that very interesting metaphor, which I'm not sure was really a metaphor, but I think maybe we can embrace it. Rather than seeing our students or ourselves as part of the army, maybe we can start seeing ourselves as the bridge. And if we use bridging as a metaphor, and you mentioned bridging between liberal Americans and Israelis, how would we organize our educational efforts around the notion of bridge? What would it mean for our students if we help them see that when they go out there, they can be the bridge between different groups of Jews? The last comment that I'll make, and this is really from my own research on Yom HaZikaron, when I ask students and when I ask parents in the adult education class, what could it mean to be responsible to Israel? What could it mean for us to see ourselves as responsible members of the Jewish people? The students really were stuck after they said, make Aliyah, go to AIPAC, or send money. And even in our conversations, when I pushed them, what else could you do? What could it mean to imagine your future as a future that's uniquely positioned to bring your voice to this hybridity, to this contribution, this partnership, this exchange between America and Israel? Let's dream. The students waited for me to give them the response. And my challenge to us is, let's do better.
I'm going to make my remarks now very brief to leave us more time for conversation. So I'll only address one aspect of Dr. Jacobowicz's comments, and that is the question of the grand conversation and engaging fully with the wisdom of the secular world, and particularly with the wisdom of secular academia. I think there is often a sense that that wisdom is particularly threatening to our students' commitments as Zionists, and that if our students are taught to engage with the idea that there can be multiple narratives, multiple perspectives, indeed multiple truths, if our students are taught to think that way, that perhaps that leaves them unable to be Zionists. And if I understood you correctly, you were asking whether I was recommending engaging with that as a sort of preventive measure to keep them from falling off because they will encounter this anyway on college campuses, or whether I think essentially that these ideas have value, that they enrich our thinking, and that we should be encouraging our students to engage with them. I am, as I write in the paper, a believer in the strong version of the grand conversation, which is to say the grand conversation as an intellectual value, as a religious value, as something that we should be encouraging and supporting in our students. I don't think we should be encouraging our students to engage with these ideas only because they will encounter them in college anyway, so we have to prepare them. I think we also have to be encouraging them to engage with these ideas because they have a lot to offer. And where these ideas can be deployed in the service of an anti-Semitism, and indeed at times something that bleeds into anti-Zionism, which then at times can bleed into anti-Semitism on campus, I do think we need to prepare them for that reality. But to assume that every engagement or encounter with those ideas is inherently anti-Zionist or certainly anti-Semitic is undermining the very convictions that we articulate and communicate to our students all the time, that there is in fact great value to that encounter and that we are enriched by it.
I just want to make a brief comment in terms of kind of students and their readiness and kind of imagining all of that. I think that the idea of this enterprise is to create a safe space for I'll say the adults to be able to have a conversation and put ideas out there and try things out and get feedback. In that sense, you know, what we are sharing today is not, I would ask you to take it in that spirit, meaning some of you might say, oh, so this is a new kind of way of teaching kids, we're going to translate that into a classroom. When we talk about the structures, we're not talking about doing anything, certainly can't do that kind of thing alone, etc. They're like toes in the water, kind of dipping your toes in the water with certain kinds of things, meaning we'll learn the sugya in Ksubos about Bavel and Eretz Yisrael in order to be able to do a certain kind of exposure. But I guess what I'm saying is that this is a beginning of a conversation that can then branch into a larger conversation that get more people involved, that can have some kind of impact in the classroom. But all of this has to be done very kind of thoughtfully. I think that part of the educator side of all of us is to say, no, this isn't a kind of you have an idea and then you implement it. This is a kind of putting some ways of thinking out there for other people to respond to, and then see what catches and what doesn't, and how we can kind of help broaden our thinking around things like this. But that's a slow move. That takes time.
Okay, we're now going to open up the conversation to all of you. And whether you're an FCR faculty person. Okay, we have our first name.
Say it, go last.
So please stand up.
Say your name. Matthew Lindenbaum, great-grandson of Rabbi Big Gourmet. So my first is just a comment. So not only did Rowitowitz have a problem with the name Israel, but Rabbi Soloveitchik also did. And he always referred to it as the state of Israel. He also thought that it was, to arrogate that kind of, responsibility to call yourself Israel was unacceptable.
He didn't get elected, Rav Amiel did.
Rav Amiel. Side note, Rav Amiel beat out Rav Soloveitchik, Chief Rabbi of Tel Aviv. No, he got beat. He got beat. How he thought he ever had a chance is beyond me.
And he never went back.
Right, and he never went back there.
And Rabbi Davish and the Rav were friends also.
Right.
From Warsaw.
Right. Exactly, that's true. So so you brought over with, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Rabbi Davish. So there's a chapter to the famous book that you're citing that wasn't published, that he decided in the end, it's not clear, there's a whole book about it, what happened. A whole chapter on why, remember this is in the 50s, early 50s, why Israel had to let all the refugees, Palestinian refugees, back. Not for political reasons, but for moral reasons. That it was incumbent upon Israel to let them come back. And then until they did, there was just a moral problem with the state of Israel. And there's also a quote from Moshe Amiel in one of his books. He has a quote from, he wrote a piece at the time where he said, if we could bring redemption, I'm sort of quoting loosely, if we could bring Mashiach or redemption with the blood of Arabs, better not to have Mashiach or redemption. So you can see Rowitowitz, or whatever his name was, they probably learned it from Rav Amiel. And so, is that a question? So my question, Ben doesn't want me to go there. My question is, because I feel like there's an elephant in the room that we're not addressing. The elephant in the room is this. At what point, Israel is obvious, right? Israel becomes increasingly more religious, more intolerant, less liberal. We can disagree about how much, but it's certainly happening. And more disconnected from liberal America or liberal Jewry in America. So the question becomes, at what point do we turn to A.B. Yoshua and say, I just don't get you. I don't get you. At what point do we have to engage, not, engage with Israel, and you keep talking about what do we have to add to the equation here as Americans. I think what we have to add is Rowitowitz, Rav Amiel, to have that kind of Zionism. Maybe Yehuda Magnus, Martin Buber, Gershom Scholem, those kinds of people who believe in a different kind of Zionism. And I think that conversation, that's disappeared. Today, if you have that point of view, you're a BDS and you're an anti-Semite. So that's sort of my question /statement.
We're gonna do the Donahue thing now.
All right.
It's being recorded.
She's loud.
All right.
My name is Miriam Kaufman-Feldstein. I'm the Lindenbaum's niece. She is smiling down and shaking her finger at you. And enjoying this. I wish she was here to enjoy this evening with all of us. I think you've left out a piece. They're talking about how to teach this to children. And high school has to begin the process of critical thinking. They're coming in at 13 and 14 years old, and we are a modern Orthodox institution, and we have to present with a certain bias that this is not a university campus that's open to all ways of thinking. And what surprised me very much is that you kept putting the religious piece on the side, because I have a hard time with Alfredo Joux. I think if he was born in France, he would be a Frenchman and as dedicated to the country of France as he is to Israel. I don't think he is just happens to be a native Israeli. And I think we are Am Yisrael. And Am Yisrael is very different than Eretz Israel. I don't, and while we've had, because of wars and fights, and you want to even go back and say because of all the sins that we all committed, we were kicked out of Israel. We were given Israel. I don't think when we were given Israel, the idea was, you can have it if you want it, but if you don't, you can go to somewhere else. But we were kicked out and we made the best of it. And we flourished anyway because we had the Torah behind us. Otherwise, the people who left Israel without religion have completely assimilated, have lost Jewish identity, and it's only because of keeping the common traditions outside of the state of Israel. And I think that the religious piece of it has to run through your neck. I mean, this is a modern Orthodox school. It's not a secular school. And you have to keep that in mind as you're bringing in all these other people who are Zionists. I'm not sure they're quite, if they feel themselves Jewish as much as they feel Zionist in a Jewish state. Don't keep putting it to the side. It has to be part of the conversation, I think, for children.
Yeah, I want to let's get two more and then we'll respond and then okay? Yeah. By the way, everybody who's not in the Lindenbaum family.
My name is Abigail Tamborg, Lindy Tamborg. But my question is sort of, you have raised a lot of really interesting nuance. The notion of a nuanced Zionist education for high schoolers, I think, is something that many of us would really very much welcome and applaud. But there are a lot of parents out there who I don't think fully, they might need that nuanced education as well. And where is the parent piece in your program to allow parents to hear what these students are going to come back saying, because they're going to say things that are traditionally somewhat incendiary to the narrative. Let me take a step back. When I went to high school, there was no narrative. We weren't taught any Zionist history at all, because to teach us anything would be almost too hard or too hot to handle. So it was a lot of biblical, and it was a lot of modern Zionist simcha dancing, but there wasn't, well, I wouldn't even go that far.
Don't forget the myths.
Wait, thank you. But what I would say is, I think that in doing this, you probably need to create a parent go along, just so you're, otherwise you're going to get a lot of phone calls. But aside from that, I think there needs to be, because you said that it's a multifaceted, multi-part, long, nuanced discussion and evolution in an educational process, I do think you need to give parents the opportunity to come along with you and get a piece of that narrative as well.
I'm Victoria Lindenbaum. I wanted to comment. I mean, I agree with Abigail. The parent part, I think, has to actually come first, because I think, if anything, what I learned from so political here is that the children are very often now mouthpieces for what their parents believe, and so it's very important to have parents be educated as well. But I actually take issue with a little bit of what Miriam said, because I think while these are children coming in at 13 and 14, how we teach them and the truths we tell will serve as the guide for the rest of their lives. And if they find out we gave them a nuanced or biased truth, it begins to undermine the education that we provided to them. And it could actually swing back the other way to hurt us. And I think the best we can do is be honest, and that is the role of the school, is to be honest and to provide an open platform for discussion, open opportunity. And to the question of how we do this, because we have teachers who take different positions, and again, that was learned and heard way through the political process, is you have panels like this, where you enable both sides to have an open forum and allow the children to hear both sides and come to a little bit of their own conclusions about what position they want to take. So they should be given the opportunity to hear the truths, hear the true history, and the moral questions that arise from that, because they're going to continue to tackle these throughout their lives. And I don't think it's ever too early. We all take an opportunity to teach our children ethics and morality and what's right and wrong, and here's yet another opportunity. And I think we can still teach about nationhood and Jewish peoplehood at the same time being open and honest with some of our mistakes and challenges that we face.
Yes, okay. So I actually appreciate all of those comments. It's all in the right territory, and my response is going to be a little bit about our process. I'm sidestepping it a drop, because I think that what's so important here is that this exchange for us, and I've found that in talking about the project, this is the hardest thing for me to be able to explain, is the local nature of this undertaking. Meaning, this is hard, this is a difficult thing, because in writing something like this and sharing it, I want it to be shared so that we can have a conversation, but there is no assumption that this is some kind of wide-ranging theology or whatever that covers all the bases of. This is like, if you work in a school, you have a certain kind of problem, you want to think about that problem, you want to put it out there. Meaning, my response to you, and you're 100% right, is we live in a school where that's happening all the time. We're always talking about the larger narrative. We're always talking about, this morning what I learned Gemara was about, the Ramban's mitzvah aseh to make aliyah. That was like the topic in class. So what we're writing about is the part that we feel like we need to think about. And I think that there's a way in which the educator enterprise here requires something different, which is a space to be able to put the things out there and talk about that in their specific local, local nature of it, and have people be kind of our friends here, like engaged in the conversation with, assuming that that's part of the ongoing kind of dialogue around the issue. And that means tremendous patience in terms of what you actually bring to kids, and not jumping to that too quickly, and then thinking about how to be able to bring it to parents. And this is all the kind of the beginning of the large, meaning, I guess what I'm saying in response is, how to do educational change in content and ideas in a thoughtful and systematic way, I think is pretty uncharted territory. And so that takes moving slowly through all of these kinds of things, which is why I'm not just being, kind of being nice and say, I think all the things you're raising are really the right things, but we're going to go through them slowly because it's big and takes time and patience and understanding on the part of all the constituents to make any kind of progress around it.
I'll first say that as a meta comment, the range of views expressed in this room about this issue just in the last 10 minutes, I think illustrates the scope of the challenge. When we bring together in the school a lot of different parents and students from different communities with different points of view, and we are trying to... Right. Well, we bring together in the school, Kal Vachomer, when we bring together in the school students from a lot of different families, different perspectives, different points of view, and we are trying to accomplish something educationally while including all of these people in the school educational community. Then just two things briefly. One thing that I think about quite a bit as a teacher of American history and American government, and which I actually mentioned in my paper, is the interesting case of the United States. We have no difficulty in our American history classes teaching our students about all kinds of bad stuff that the United States did in its history without thinking that this will undermine our students' ability to be patriotic or committed citizens.
But those are not ongoing things. Those are in the past.
Oh, I would beg to differ considerably. We can take this up over sliced melon afterwards. But we are not afraid of that undermining our kids' ability to be committed and patriotic Americans. And somehow, when it comes to Israel, there are things that we are afraid to engage with with a certain kind of honesty because we are afraid that it will undermine our kids' Zionism or commitment to Israel. There are a lot of reasons and ways to understand that, why that is and why the American case might be distinguishable. It might be different than the Israeli case. But nevertheless, it gives me a lot to think about in terms of contexts in which we in fact have confidence in our students' abilities to hear complicated truths and to hear nuance and to be able to take it in even in high school and yet to make sense out of that and to make meaning out of that. I would say, however, that I would be very reluctant to talk about teaching students true history because I think that what we have to teach our students are true histories, and I do not think that that means that because one thing is true and something else is true, that nothing is true. In other words, the celebration that we are about to have for the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Yerushalayim and the recognition of that both as a tremendous military victory and as a showing of divine hand in history is true. The experience of a 16-year-old who has lived his entire life in Gaza today is also true. It's a different truth. It operates on a different level. I don't have to say that one is not true for the other one to be true. They can both be true. And that can be a complicated thing for our children, our students to engage with and to think about. And for us to be able to say to them that we as educators, that you as Jews need to be able to engage with a world in which both of those things are true. Not that nothing is true, not that there is no truth, but that both of those things are true, and to think about what it means for you and to think about what it means for our broader community of American Zionists, for the community of Israeli Zionists. Those are the kinds of things that we are hoping to get to and to accomplish in some of this education.
And we're going to leave it there for now. We want to invite everyone. Everyone is welcome to continue the conversation. We are going to daven Mariv in here at 9:20. There are refreshments outside. We want to thank everyone for a wonderful evening.